Today, we're not just kicking back and passively analyzing a classic novel. We are acting as investigators. We're dusting off the blueprints of Aldous Huxley's 1932 masterpiece, Brave New World, to uncover the actual mechanics of a flawless, inescapable dictatorship. But as we start combing through the original text, something deeply unsettling happens. You see, the clinical, fictional systems Huxley described nearly a century ago, well, they aren't just fantasy anymore. If you look closely, and I mean really closely, you can find exact passages in this book that describe, with terrifying precision, the mechanics of modern authoritarian control. Specifically, it strikingly mirrors recent explosive social and political upheavals, like the quota protests in Bangladesh. I mean, the book had absolutely no idea it was reflecting the generational conflicts of the 21st century, but the parallels are undeniable. And frankly, they're shocking. Let's look at the evidence.
Now, there's a really profound contrast we can draw from a letter Huxley actually wrote to George Orwell back in 1949. Orwell had just written 1984, imagining a future of boots perpetually stomping on human faces, right? A dystopia of brute force and constant surveillance. But Huxley wrote to Orwell to suggest that the quote-unquote ultimate revolution isn't about inflicting pain at all. Huxley believed rulers would find that the lust for power can be just as completely satisfied by suggesting people into loving their servitude as by flogging and kicking them into obedience. It's a softer, far more insidious form of control. So when we look at how governments manage unrest today, we really have to ask ourselves, are they relying on the boot or are they mastering the seduction of stability?
To understand exactly how this invisible prison functions, we're going to systematically break down the chilling, clinical methods used by the world state to maintain total control. And we're relying entirely on Huxley's original text to do it. See, this is a society built not on democratic consensus, but on biological engineering and psychological conditioning. The human being is literally reduced to a standardized cog in a massive societal machine. And as we'll see, when that machine is threatened, the state's response is swift, absolute, and thoroughly premeditated.
So let's get into Act 1, manufacturing human beings.
How exactly do you guarantee a population never rebels against an inherently unfair system? Well, you intervene before they even take their first breath. The crucial point of this regime begins at the Central London Hatchery and Conditioning Center, and right over the main entrance hangs the motto of the world state: community, identity, stability. Notice what's glaringly absent there? Freedom, individuality. Those concepts are completely sacrificed to ensure the machine of society never breaks down. Now think about this in the context of recent events in Bangladesh. Whenever state authorities implement internet blackouts, curfews, or massive crackdowns, the constant justification is always the preservation of stability. The state basically argues that the community has to be protected from chaos, and therefore the individual's right to question or protest must be entirely eradicated.
The horrific exactitude of how they actually achieve that stability from the very beginning is called Bokanovsky's process. It's this incredibly dark method of artificially arresting the development of a human egg. They subject it to 8 minutes of hard X-rays, sudden chilling, and then dose it almost to death with alcohol. This forces the egg to violently bud and divide. It's deliberate, systemic traumatization, purely designed to create absolute compliance at a cellular level.
And the results of all that biological trauma? You get up to 96 identical twins who are predestined to work 96 identical machines. The director of the hatchery proudly calls this process a major instrument of social stability. They absolutely do not want citizens who can think critically. They require a standardized labor force that simply executes commands. When we observe global manufacturing hubs today, or look at the millions of garment workers in Bangladesh who drive the economy from within heavily standardized, rigid labor structures, man, the echo of Huxley's standardized human is just chillingly recognizable.
Moving right along to Act 2, conditioning the mind.
So, biological manufacturing is really only the first piece of the puzzle, and it builds directly into psychological programming. By analyzing the world state's rigid caste system laid out here, we can see exactly how citizens are slotted into a strict, inescapable hierarchy. You've got the elite, gray-wearing alphas who hold all the intellectual power, all the way down to the black-clad epsilons, who are literally engineered to be semi-morons for menial labor. Now, think about the generational conflict that recently exploded in Bangladesh. What actually ignited it? It was a deeply controversial quota system for high-grade government jobs, a system where the students felt the elites, basically the modern-day alphas, were guaranteed the best positions, while the broader masses were left with fewer opportunities. It was essentially slotting them into a lower economic caste regardless of their actual merit. The students out there in the streets were protesting what they viewed as a real-world caste system limiting their futures.
And to prevent exactly that kind of rebellion, the world state relies on hypnopedia, or sleep teaching. But here's the kicker. As the director notes, it's not used to teach rational science, not at all. It's used entirely for moral education, which they believe ought never, in any circumstances, to be rational. They just whisper deeply prejudiced phrases into children's ears while they sleep, conditioning them to fiercely defend their own caste and blindly despise all the others. Today, authoritarian systems don't really need speakers hidden under our pillows, do they? They use state-controlled media and algorithmically weaponized social media feeds. They endlessly repeat narratives, label political opponents as traitors, and enforce a specific class consciousness until a population unquestioningly adopts the state's reality. It is literally a modern digital hypnopedia.
Which brings us to Act 3, the eradication of the soul.
Once the body and mind are completely engineered, the final step for the world state is to eradicate any of those messy, unpredictable human emotions that might threaten this carefully constructed stability. This ideological battle really comes to a head in a fascinating debate between the world controller Mustafa Mond and John the Savage, a man who was raised outside this sterile society. Mond argues that great art and deep feeling are just impossible now. He says, "You can't make tragedies without social instability. The world is safe, and hey, if anything goes wrong, there's always a drug to fix it." But John pushes back hard. He cries out, "But I don't want comfort. I want God, I want poetry, I want real danger, I want freedom." And you know, that is the ultimate cry of the protesting student, the dissenting journalist, the citizen demanding true, messy freedom over a suffocating, state-mandated comfort. To crush John's argument, Mond cites this incredible piece of history within the text, The Cyprus Experiment. And guys, this is where the parallel to Bangladesh becomes so sharp it's almost terrifying. In the year AF 473, the state populated the island of Cyprus entirely with 22,000 elite alphas. They gave them all the equipment and just let them run it. And what happened? Constant strikes, disobedience. I'm going to quote Huxley directly here. All the people detailed for a spell of low-grade work were perpetually intriguing for high-grade jobs, and all the people with high-grade jobs were counter-intriguing at all costs to stay where they were. Within 6 years, a devastating civil war erupted. Listen to those exact words again. Intriguing for high-grade jobs, leading to civil war. Huxley perfectly documented the exact powder keg of the Bangladeshi quota protests decades before they ever happened. We're talking about a generation fighting desperately over a limited supply of high-grade government jobs, which leads to national strikes, mass disobedience, and tragic, deadly violence on the streets. Mond uses this as definitive proof that free-thinking ambition will tear society apart, and he uses it to justify the absolute authoritarian suppression of the masses.
So, if you absolutely must suppress the masses to avoid a civil war, how do you stop them from rising up? Simple. You give them soma. Soma is the ultimate pacifier. It's a state-provided narcotic used to just swallow up any negative emotion because, as the conditioning constantly repeats, a gram is better than a damn. When reality gets too bleak, citizens just take a holiday from it. In our world today, soma isn't necessarily a pill you swallow. It's the endless, numbing scroll of social media. It's the cheap, algorithmic distractions that flood our brains with dopamine. When the youth in Bangladesh, or really anywhere else, feel the crushing, inescapable weight of systemic inequality, the ultimate authoritarian hope is that they'll simply numb themselves with digital soma rather than taking to the streets to actually demand change.
But here's the thing. Human biology still craves the physical rush of feeling alive. So, to solve this safely, the state mandates VPS treatments, violent passion surrogates. Once a month, citizens are flooded with adrenaline to simulate the physiological effects of murder, fear, and rage. But it's completely safe, without actually inconveniencing society in the slightest. It's synthetic catharsis. I mean, think of the outrage cycles on modern social media platforms. We are constantly provoked into a frenzy of digital rage, right? We type furiously, we feel the massive rush of righteous anger, and then we go to sleep, having done absolutely nothing to challenge the actual power structures in the real world. We are basically undergoing our very own violent passion surrogate.
Because ultimately, a self-sufficient, artificially numbed population needs nothing else. Mund chillingly explains to John that old religious and philosophical texts are just locked away in a safe. He states it plainly. God isn't compatible with machinery and scientific medicine and universal happiness. You must make your choice. A society that never ages, never suffers, and has soma to wipe away literally every tear, well, it simply has no practical need for a higher power, for deep moral questioning, or for absolute truths. They have actively chosen machinery and state-mandated happiness over the profound, difficult reality of the human soul.
And that brings us to our conclusion. Loving our servitude.
As we wrap up this explainer and look at the endgame of this kind of society, we have to look at how Huxley himself viewed his dark creation nearly 3 decades after it was published. What does his final warning mean for us today? Well, in 1958, a 63-year-old Aldous Huxley looked around at the rapidly changing, highly technological world of the Cold War. He assessed the radical changes since his 1932 masterpiece and wrote a series of essays called Brave New World Revisited. And in doing so, he came to a profoundly unsettling realization regarding his original blueprints.
Huxley admitted he had made one major miscalculation: his timeline. He originally projected this dystopia 600 years into the future. But by 1958, observing the rapid advancement of mass media and psychology, he wrote, "Today it seems quite possible that the horror may be upon us within a single century." The technological tools required to manipulate massive populations into absolute submission were developing at a terrifying speed. They were bringing his dictatorship of pleasure right to our doorstep.
He explicitly outlined the tools of this impending ultimate revolution, and honestly, they read like a modern authoritarian playbook. The over-organization of society, infant conditioning, psychoanalysis combined with hypnosis, improved pervasive techniques of propaganda, and chemical suggestibility. He warned that future dictators would realize that violence is just inefficient. The lust for power can be completely satisfied by manipulating people into loving their servitude. You don't need a brutal military dictatorship if you can just distract, numb, and digitally suggest the population into absolute compliance.
So, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought. As we analyze the fierce protests over job quotas in Bangladesh, as we recognize the algorithmic control of our daily feeds, and as we witness the growing systemic inequality worldwide, if the ultimate revolution isn't a prison of concrete and steel, but a prison built entirely out of pleasure, comfort, and constant distraction, are we eagerly running inside and locking the door behind us?